So I am Nayana Prakash, and I will be the moderator for this session. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Before we begin, I just want to introduce our speakers today. So first we have Abeba Birhane. She's a cognitive scientist researching human behavior, social systems, and responsible and ethical AI. She's a senior fellow in Trustworthy AI at Mozilla Foundation. Her interdisciplinary research explores various broad themes in cognitive science, AI, complexity science, and theories of decoloniality. We also have Milagros Miceli. Dr. Milagros Miceli is a sociologist and computer scientist who investigates how ground truth data for machine learning is produced. The focus of her research are labor conditions and power dynamics in data generation and labeling. Broadly, she's interested in questions of meaning-making, knowledge production, and symbolic power encoded in machine learning data. Milagros leads the newly founded research group Data, Algorithm Systems, and Ethics at the Weizenbaum Institute. She also works as a researcher at DAIR Institute, where she's thinking through ways of engaging communities of data workers in AI research. So, as you can see, sorry, some people coming in. There's a lot of big words on the on things. So artificial intelligence, digital colonialism, maybe some of these are terms we can explore the meaning behind them. And when we think of AI, a lot of the words that come to mind might be ethics or bias. But one of the things we were talking about earlier is power. How is power encoded in AI? Do you want to start, what does power in AI mean to you? Where does power lie when we think about AI?
Should I start?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I wish like a lot of the I wish when we think about AI, the things we think about, the concepts that come to mind are, as you said, bias or fairness or anything like that. But that's far from the reality. Mm-hmm. That's far from it. Actually, myself and my colleagues did an extensive research on the values of AI. So we looked at 100 most influential papers in machine learning and AI from two most prestigious conferences, ICML and NeurIPS. The idea is like we all have instincts, intuitions that AI researchers value, performance. It's about efficiency. It's about generalization. But there hasn't been actually, data and evidence kind of exploring, making these points explicit. And that's what we did. And what we found was that out of the 100 most influential papers over 10 years, almost all of them care about performance, efficiency, novelty, generalization, all these things. And again, out of the 100 papers, only 2 of them mentioned the societal impacts of AI, and one of them barely in passing. And the defense for this and like the kind of the pushback against it has been like, these are machine learning papers, these are AI papers. They don't have to think about societal impacts. But I think this is deeply mistaken because first of all, these are like most influential papers that are really defining the field. And second of all, these are also like papers that have put forward really influential models, influential tools, influential methods. One of them was actually a paper that released, and a model that released deepfakes. And now look at deepfakes. 90% of deepfakes is used to generate pornographic videos and pornographic images. And the other papers are talking about, misinformation, disinformation, content moderation. So when you are like releasing models and tools in these very socially entrenched topics, the defense that, it's machine learning or AI, they shouldn't care about, the societal implications of AI is like deeply wrong, I think. I guess, going back to your point about power also, there has been a lot of discussion, especially in this room today, about democratizing AI and how open source models are decentralizing, how they are giving people access because they are not open sourced. The thing is like AI inherently in and of itself is a power centralizing industry, a power centralizing venue. Again, the same result from this same paper. It's called the values encoded in machine learning. We analyzed, how corporate affiliations and affiliations from elite universities over these 100 most influential papers over the 10 years of time. We looked at papers from 2008 and 2009 versus 2018 and 2019. And what we found was that the involvement of corporates has like doubled almost 5 times. It was in 2008 and 2009, papers affiliated with big tech were only 11%. And 10 years later, it doubled, it multiplied to 58%, almost 60%. So it really is centralizing power to the powerful few, to the handful few. And even with, I will stop now. I'll just say a few things because I know I'm saying so much. Even with the release of big models in the open source, I don't think like AI is really decentralizing power. It really is, it really is concentrating power. Yeah. I mean, like this is something that affects me personally as a researcher. Yes, we talked about stable diffusion earlier, and it's great that it's open sourced. People can, like play around with it and experiment with it, and people have access. Open sourcing is really important. I'm a dataset auditor. If something is not open sourced, you can't do anything. You can't examine it. You can't audit it. It's important. But open sourcing without mechanisms for accountability is just, really I don't see the value of it. And one of the things, so I want to get to the double-edged swordness of this open sourcing. So we were able to audit, for example, the Lion 400 dataset, which is the basis for stable diffusion now, about a year ago. It was relatively small. It had, only 400 million image text pairs. But now the dataset has grown exponentially. It's over 5 billion image text pairs, and it's really difficult to keep track of it. And even if it's open sourced, we as like relatively disfranchised researchers, we don't have the compute power. We don't have the resources to store the data. We don't have like the compute to do the analysis. So open sourcing without also, without also putting some kind of measure for people to actually access and to actually do the work is also somewhat, very limited and very short-sighted. So I'll stop talking now. I know I'm talking too much, and I'll let you add to any points you might have.
Thank you, Abeba. Thanks for that intervention, and please don't shut up because I think everyone in the room agrees that it's a pleasure to hear you, and it's also my honor to be here with you. So I thank you also for that intervention. I was thinking while you were speaking about your paper, your wonderful paper about the values encoded in AI, in machine learning. And you mentioned these values about performance, scalability, and all that we know about AI. But I was thinking, okay, there's the value. Where's the main driver of this, and that is money. Let's not forget. And you said this at the end, so I thank you for that. Because let's not forget that AI is produced within multi-billion-dollar corporations. It is generating a lot of money for someone that is not us. So I think that it's important to remember that's where the power is. The power is in the money. And therefore, it is important to bring back the political economy of AI into discussion, something that we don't really talk about in certain circles. In others, we do very often. Now, on the other hand, right, we have this problem that machine learning researchers, practitioners don't often talk about sorry. So sorry. Sorry about that. that machine learning practitioners and researchers don't often care about societal issues, because why would they? I mean, they get a lot of money for whatever they do, so they don't need, like there is no incentive for them to care about us people, about us, our communities. But then when we do care, when the machine learning community talks about harms caused by AI, what do we talk about? We talk about bias, and bias becomes, like this word, this buzzword that we use to define anything that is bad about AI or about technologies. And I get really allergic with that. Since I started, like I've been told many times, oh, you do. Whenever I tell what it is that I do, it's like, oh, you're a bias researcher, and I'm not. No, I'm not. And I am not that, because I don't believe that bias is a problem. I mean, there is a wonderful essay written by Weizenbaum, and it's like from 2008, I think. It is not new. So the problem is not new. It's Helen Weizenbaum and Julia Pols, and they write about how bias is a seductive distraction, right? So we are busy talking about bias, and we don't look at the real problem, and the real problem is power. The real problem is the exploitation of hundreds of workers who power AI through data work, but also through their data being taken from them. It's about the communities that are affected by AI systems, and nobody cares. It's about the minorities that get misclassified or get hyper-surveilled or put in danger, because AI is done not for those communities, it's done for the rich white dude in Silicon Valley. So I think this is why it is important to shift, and this is why I also value your question, Nayana, to talk about power instead of bias, to talk about power instead of ethics, because those are the words of the white male dude sitting in Silicon Valley. They want us to talk about that, because it's like, okay, we get stuck talking about bias, we get stuck talking about how to fix the systems that they created, instead of giving us the opportunity to reimagine new systems, or no system at all, to give us the opportunity to actually consider that it is possible not to use AI. That the fact that things are technically possible and that there is the money to actually do that, to create those systems, doesn't mean that we should be creating them. So, or not like this. So I think that's, I guess the message is, let's not get distracted.
Definitely. I think when I mentioned earlier that ethics and bias are words that get used a lot, in specific circles, that's certainly true. I think there are very sanitized ways of looking at questions of power. And another thing that maybe often gets sanitized or, is unpleasant to think about is the quote unquote logic of colonialism when it comes to AI. That's something that is also uncomfortable for people to think about. But let's reframe, let's think about colonialism and AI and how they interact with each other. I know that both of you have thought about this and done work on this, and I'd love to hear about what you think the most pressing issues we should be talking about today with regards to colonialism, with capitalism, and with AI.
Yes. Before, that's a really great question. But before we delve into that, I just want to add that, you are a bias researcher. Is like, I also don't like that.
Yeah.
Also, people are like, oh, it's so exciting to work in the AI bias space. It's like, no, it's like, I don't get if bias or injustice excites you, there is like, it's something deeply wrong. I mean,
yeah.
I'm a cognitive scientist by training, and I got into, the whole AI ethics space, definitely not because like I'm passionate about studying bias or anything. I worked in a lab full of like software developers. It's like a high performance computing lab. And I was just like surrounded by, machine learners, and constantly seeing like no assumptions being questioned, nobody caring about like where the data they're using comes from or what's in the data set, and nobody wanting to be interested in examining what is actually in the data set that they're using. So I got into it because, first of all, these are things that impact me. Like when, chatbots fail to understand my accent, it's not just a research topic for me. It's something that personally really, frustrates me. When when I'm crossing, when I'm flying and I have to to cross borders and I have to interact with, facial recognition systems, and I have to make sure, they can see my face, my hair is in the same standard as when the foot, all these things, because I know, it's much more inaccurate for me. So these are things that personally impact me. Also, the way I got into it is because seeing nobody's actually doing the work. I mean,
it's like a feeling of you have to do it because no one else is doing it.
I started especially getting into the dataset audit space. It's really by accident. I was just playing around with datasets and coming across. So 2 years ago, for example, we audited the tiny images, 80 million tiny image dataset with a colleague. Totally landed by accident on it, and just finding it was a really ad hoc work. At one stage I was on Wikipedia finding a list of racial slurs and taking a list and putting it, querying into the data set, and coming up with thousands and thousands and thousands of images labeled with the N word, the S word. I won't even say the words that are not appropriate to talk about here. And images that I cannot present, images that I have to blur before publication and before presentation. So these are things that people like me get into because it's not a glamorous work. No. It's if you apply for funding, for example, proposing, say, to audit this dataset in that dataset versus to build a seemingly, fancy sounding model. You're going to get, the funding for the latter. So it's, sorry, I'm just I just want to add to your frustration. I also, and the whole idea of, bias, I won't even get into that. And maybe I think you wanted, I'll get back to the decolonial or
That's
question.
Okay.
I think we were in a conversation earlier where I really liked your approach of flipping the whole question and reframing it, and I like that. So maybe I'll let you take that, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you. Just to add again to the frustration, sorry, this is a never-ending story. I just wanted to say briefly, adding to this question of not our work not being glamorous. 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I started. I brought a proposal to get funding to do work with data annotators. The first comment was, "Why do you want to work with these people? Data annotation is going to be automated anyway in a few years." It's whatever. If they are subject to precarious conditions and they cannot make ends meet with what they're getting, if they are being exploited right now, it doesn't matter because in 5 years this will be automated. So why do you care? Anyway, stop with the rant. So the question was
about colonialism and AI, which probably leads us quite well onto your work, I think.
Yeah. In a way it does, because as we heard this morning from Anasuya, with whose knowledge, colonialism and capitalism, they go together. One wouldn't be possible without the other. And the fact that my work, again, is with data workers, for those who don't know about them, and that's normal because that's a work that is not very glamorous to talk about. Data workers are workers who take care of generating data. Generating data could be to collect data, scrape data from the internet, but also to, for example, take selfies of themselves, or to go places and take pictures of things, or to record their own voices. That's the data generation. And there's also data labeling. So for a model to understand what they see, for example, in a picture, that picture needs to be labeled. That work is generally outsourced. It's outsourced to, not to every place, of course, it's mostly outsourced to the so-called global south. Why is it outsourced? Well, because when it's outsourced, it is possible to do that at scale, because you have the poorer the place, the more people you have available to do this kind of job for pennies. And it's possible to scale that, and it's also cheap, because when you outsource it, you outsource it through platforms or through companies, again, located mostly in the global south, where the conditions of these workers are just horrible. They get paid by, they don't have any security. They don't have, of course, health insurance. They don't even get a salary. They are paid per piece. So, per annotation or per picture or per recording. And that's, again, reproduces the colonial logic of people, white people sitting in the north. Silicon Valley is one of those places, but it's also Europe, it's also North America. So sitting in the north and taking from the global south. It reproduces that very same logic of taking the labor, the resources, and now the data of those people, because not only is that their work is about generating data, but it's also that their own data, through their labor, through their performance, that data is taken from them, and that's something to be worried about, I would say.
Do you want to speak about the logic of colonialism in AI?
Yeah, I love the way you put it, and I love the fact that this is like turning into a data discussion, because usually data is, any discussions about data is undervalued, or but I mean, data sets are really critical. They're the backbone of any AI systems. Whereas work on data set auditing, where the data comes from, who is labeling it, how much are they being paid, and what is the rights of the data subjects, whether it's images or texts. These are questions like the machine learning community just has pushed out for the large part. I mean, you try to bring the question of for example, I mainly work with image data sets, and I have been trying to grapple with the fact that on the one hand, you have regulations that say, especially within GDPR, that say, any kind of data sourcing has to be lawful, has to be consensual, and has to be, I think, fair. I think these are the three criteria. And none of them are being look at computer vision data sets. Almost all of them, no consensus is asked. No. Zero consensus. You can find your image in a huge data set, and sometimes you don't even know that your image will be there. And when you try to have sometimes this conversation, you are made feel like you are the crazy one. Sorry, this panel is turning out to be a rant rather than...
please excuse the rant.
Not at all.
Yes.
No, I'm enjoying it. Keep going.
Yeah.
Can I rant a little bit more?
Yes.
Please. I feel like I'm in a therapy office, but I'm not doing anything. I'm just yes, go on.
Just for the record, I had a very, very bad morning, so I need to rant. What I wanted to say is that coming back to the logic of colonialism and how that leaves a trace that is visible, I wanted to add one more thing, and I think that's something important also for the students and the researchers in the room. I think one thing that I observe more and more, and that I really want to be aware of, is how research also reproduces the logic of colonialism many times. And I think it is important, especially for people like me working with people on the margins.
Especially at the Rhodes Trust, to think about.
That's what I want to, also that's the elephant in the room, right? We are researchers sitting here. I'm not outside of this. I'm sitting here at something sponsored by the Rhodes Trust, and I think that's something we need to name. But how we researchers reproduce that logic, how we parachute ourselves places, and we think that we understand the perils and the suffering of people doing certain work in certain places, and actually we don't, and we think that we can interpret or use our framings, even sometimes the framing of colonialism, to explain the lives of the lived experiences of people that we really don't know much about. And this applies to armchair research, that there's a lot about, that there's a lot of that, but it also applies to, I don't know, ethnographic research. That's a great example of that, you know, like people going from Europe somewhere and saying, oh, this is exotic, let's talk about, let's research this. And that still happens. And I think that's a problem that we, just saying that we as researchers are not out of that, that's also a danger that affects us.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so glad you said that, even if we now won't be invited to any roads events in the future. So both of you, I mean, in different ways perhaps, but talking a little bit about this idea of people. So people-centered research maybe, or thinking about people when we're talking about AI, what we're actually talking about is labor and people. That's a big part of your work. And thinking about, you know, justice in people when we think of like images, for example. We need to center people at the heart of decision-making about AI. What does that actually look like? This idea of like values that concern people, values concerned with looking after people and not just with building and expanding and growing?
That is a really good question, and I will break it down a little bit. So we often talk about like AI that benefits people or AI that centers people, but we have to be specific about which people.
Yes.
Of course, AI benefits like people, it benefits millionaires, even like the most unethical like technology, take facial recognition systems for problematic applications such as, you know, emotion recognition or whatever, even though there is very little societal benefit to it, it still makes money for some powerful folks. So it's, I want to break that down to what people, which group of people. That allows us to talk about, you know, what benefit for who. So for me, it's important, like there is like a huge amount of work, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, mainly done by Black women, you know, researchers from the global north, that shows that AI systems like need constant maintenance to function properly. They always fail. It's not like if it fails, it always fails. And like they always end up in with discriminatory outcomes. And you can guarantee, like I've audited a number of data sets at this stage. And my thinking is that like, unless you go in and audit your data sets, you can 100% guarantee that data set has like really depressing, negative, stereotypical associations of like people, cultures, groups. You can guarantee that it contains content that shouldn't be there, that I can't name. Actually, myself and Hannah and others have worked on how to talk about how do we talk about problematic content in a data set, because this is a new venue. We're coming up, like I'm looking at my screen, like very explicit pornographic images. Like towards the end of my PhD, my supervisor is like, sorry, you can't work on this in this lab because it's like my screen is like constantly not safe. So this is a new area, and where we have work like outlining how do we communicate about this work, how do we present it, and that kind of stuff. So coming back to my point, so when you look at data sets, because large scale data sets are largely, you know, scraped from the web. And like one of the main reasons the deep learning revolution happened 14, 15 years ago is because of the internet, because of the availability of large scale data sets. The techniques are not new. They have had, they've been like around since the 1970s, the 1980s. So the reason for, you know, we have like very, you know, successful advanced AI is because of the availability of data sets, large-scale data sets that can be scraped from the internet. That means that any data sets that come from the internet, and most data sets come from the internet because that's the only place you can source huge amounts of data set, you can guarantee that they embody the world's ugliness, the world's horribleness. And what going back to the point, and you have like when AI systems go wrong, they always go wrong. And when you look at data sets, there is always problems. And when these problems happen, there is, I remember my point. So there is like, look at like the last 4 or 5 years of research in data, in whether it's, AI ethics or data set auditing, which is largely done by Black women and researchers from the global South. It's the same thing. When things go wrong, they always disproportionately negatively impact people that are at the margins of society.
Yeah.
So given that we have even enough evidence, like when AI fails, when they discriminate, when they are not working properly, the fact that the groups and communities and people that are most negatively impacted by these systems, by the failure of these systems, are people at the margin, then when we are talking about like AI that benefits humanity or AI that benefits society, I think it's appropriate to think of those people, to think of people at the margin, because they are the most disproportionately impacted, because they also have the epistemic privilege to understand and to realize and to know what's harmful. This goes back to what Ruman was saying during this morning's talk, where she's like, if you are, a white dude in Silicon Valley, you like, if the problem doesn't affect you, you are unlikely to fix it. You are unlikely to even become aware of it. So coming back to your question, I think it's good to ask like AI that benefits people, but people that are the most disproportionately impacted. And if we start from that, then we can center their values. Yeah. Of course, there is no one single value, but it's like overlapping multiple values. But that doesn't mean it's unworkable. So then we can start from there. We can start as I said at the beginning, like for much of the AI community, the most treasured values are like performance, efficiency, or whatever. So maybe like we can start to flip that. We can start to maybe think about like, justice and respect and fairness and, all other important values. And that way we can build from there.
Definitely. And the phrase, AI for humanity, AI that benefits people, so often used as a kind of buzz.
AI for common good. Right?
Like a catchphrase, basically. Absolutely. Mila, your work so often focuses on, as I said, decentering this idea of AI and recentering it on people, or people who work in AI, people who are AI, basically.
Exactly. Because so much of what we call AI these days is actually human labor. And in a very, not only talking about, again, data work and that kind, and also not talking about the work of modeling that engineers do. I'm talking really about explicit cases of things that get sold as AI. For example, smart cameras that are just being sold, or services that involve smart cameras that say that they are being sold as, okay, this is AI powered, when actually what powers them are an army of workers sitting somewhere in Syria and being paid to be monitoring those cameras installed somewhere. And so this is a lie. It's really a lie that companies, startups tell so that they get more investment, so they get their business started. And what they tell us, or the excuse that they put is, okay, this is how we are collecting the data. This is how we are collecting the data to have a model in the end that will be able to do this. But in the meantime, we need these workers to do this work. And we cannot disclose that this is not AI, because otherwise the investor will take away the money. So, like, again, this entanglement of money, business, technology, and what's possible technically and what's needed in terms of the business model. So I think it is key to center when we talk, one way of talking about people. I mean, there are many people in the margins that we need to talk about, but one group that to me is very important is the people, the labor that fuels AI. And I think that we need to talk about that. We need to recenter AI around the workers that make it possible. One way of doing that is, of course, talking about it, making it public, saying the AI is not as intelligent as they want us to believe. There is an army of workers behind that, and those workers are generally not being treated in a good way. They are precarized, they are hyper surveilled, they are alienated from, many of them don't know that they have other colleagues somewhere else because they work for platforms that don't allow them to get in contact with anyone else. They don't know what the supply chain that fuels AI look like, so they don't even know that they are fueling a multi-billion-dollar industry with their labor. So I think the first step is talking about it, and I think that we researchers in whatever this field is called, be it bias, be it ethics, be it justice, people who care about these questions should really recenter labor as a fundamental dimension of AI. Another way of doing this, or a complementary way, I think the press, the journalism, the public discourse needs to stop selling us the lie of sentient machines that are able to do this and that, and really talk about the labor. So stop talking about, I don't know, techno-futuristic, whatever bullshit.
Yeah.
Sorry. Start talking about what really is, and that is people. And I think there is a responsibility there. And then we as people, as organizers, as people with different ties in different communities, supporting these workers through education, through supporting initiatives for them to organize, to even unionize. Hopefully, that's really something that I want to see one day. So I think there are many ways, but I think labor is really a key word here.
Isn't it interesting that when it comes to AI, we're so much more afraid of like super robots than we are of people being paid less than minimum wage?
Exactly.
So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but otherwise I was going to move us towards questions because I'm sure there are going to be so many. Do you have anything you'd like to finally add to the point?
I agree with everything you say. And yes, it's like
Great.
AI is people through and through and through. From the data, that it's trained on, it comes from people, from the people that are putting on the labor, labeling it, making corrections, people cleaning it, people building the models, all the way from the beginning to the end. Even like the AI is not going to be built and like sit in a lab or something. It's going to be like put out into the world, into people. So it's like without the people using it, interacting with it, it's useless. So it's people through and through, and without people there can't be AI.
Great. Exactly. Okay, so let's move to questions. The first person I saw, sorry Hannah, is the person with the, yes, in the back.
Hi, I mean, before I started, I'm so happy that you said that it's okay to be biased. Reminded me of Becker's article, Whose Side We Are On. And as sociologists, after that, we were like, yes, we are going to pick up a side. That's great. So, my question is regarding that the imaginaries of artificial intelligence has its roots in colonialism, prediction, coding of bodies, making sense of the chaotic other through scientific objectivity. So this is an enterprise which has its roots in colonial governmentality. Now we are trying to sort of imagine an alternative futures of AI, whether it's AI ethics, AI humanity, decentralizing or democratizing AI. Then, and I sort of draw parallels with the abolitionist movement in policing, and we say that because policing has its history in racism or in global South and colonialism, how do we then engage with the whole idea of AI democratizing and ethics without addressing or acknowledging the colonial history of it? Particularly when we are also having conversations that we cannot have a monolithic idea of AI value. AI can have differentiated value within the same community.
Yes.
Then just sort of, I know there's no answer to this, but I was thinking that it's a good provocation. I mean, I would love to know.
Yes. That is, that's something I have been thinking about a lot, and we have I've been trying to stop myself from saying I have a paper.
Nice.
But we
have papers.
we have one coming out on the inherent tension between decolonizing an AI, because now everything is being decolonized, like decolonizing education, decolonizing data science, decolonizing cognitive science, and now we have decolonizing AI. It's like, from the outset, it just feels like so inherently incompatible, AI and decolonialism. As you rightly pointed out, like AI is rooted in colonial, ideas, like with abstraction, extraction, and then taking whatever has historically existed and like classification, sorting, creating hierarchies, and then making predictions of the future based on the past. Like, this is the opposite end of what decolonizing is. Like, there's no one concept of decolonizing, but if we have to generalize, the idea of decolonizing is like, it's a restorative work. It's about keeping, the powerful accountable. It's about going back to history, understanding history, and doing justice and making wrongs right. And it's about, at the heart of it, it's about like understanding, like in-depth understanding. It's about like uplifting that has work and like contribution in language and culture that has actively been erased by colonial powers. So when you think about it, like, it's impossible to have a decolonial AI. But in the paper, we eventually end up concluding it's possible to have a decolonial AI, but not in a way you can think of like, general systems, general AI, or like general language models. It has to be like very specific, very contextualized, very like grounded in concrete people. And one of the examples we mentioned is the Maori community, where like they are building language technology based on the data that they themselves collected, they themselves cleaned, the models they themselves built. They have their own like you know more about it than me probably. So they have like they have protocols, frameworks in place to keep the power owner of their data sets. They have their own like data hosting sites. So it's like they are like a beacon of light. They are an example of like, yeah, maybe it's possible to do it, but in a very restricted way.
Mila, do you want to have an add to that?
Just very briefly, because after that intervention, I don't have much to say. I was thinking whether, but this is a longer discussion, whether it is possible to decolonialize something that has been colonized. Like that's the impossibility of doing that is a thing. But what we can do is to, and again talking about power, is to reclaim our power and build something new. And this is something that is at the core of the work that we are also doing at DAIR. Trying not, and also why I get super allergic against this word bias, because again, we don't need to fix what is broken, and we will never be able to fix that. But we can reimagine, or not even reimagine, because that implies that we have imagined something that has been imagined before. But we need to imagine other ways. And the way of doing that is, I don't see other way of doing that but doing it community-centered and centered in the communities that have not been heard before, because the ones in power have created what we have, and that doesn't serve us. Abeba, have you ever been benefited by a system? I haven't, so I don't know. We need to create something new. And to do that, we need to listen to the people, again, related to the research question. Probably it will not be us sitting here somewhere in London telling the Global South how to do this, but probably it will come up from the Global South. But we need to enable that space, and we need to listen. For once, shut up and listen what these communities have to say, because as Abeba said with her example, they have a lot to say. It's just that we are not centering them. We are not listening.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Hannah, do you want to ask your question?
Thank you both so much. That was such a rich and lively discussion. It was great. I have a pretty close follow-up question, actually, which is about participatory AI. So since Abeba hasn't mentioned this paper, she has a great paper on it.
It's okay when other people mention my paper, but not me.
So yeah, very related to what you just finished on is like, if we want to bring more diverse perspectives to the table in like designing and deploying AI systems, how we do that in a way which grants those communities the epistemic privilege without giving them an epistemic burden. So, you know, a lot of, you've spoken about this, Abeba, like if we have ethics washing or companies coming in wanting to have a more diverse roundtable on AI, but in reality it's kind of voluntary or enforced labor, and we're falling into the same traps of hierarchies and kind of enforced contribution. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on how we can have like legitimate participatory AI, which actually achieves the aim of helping the communities to which it seeks out to help, and instead of just ethics washing or like enforcing those communities' labor.
Yeah, maybe I can start with
Yeah,
that,
please.
because you gave me the opportunity of now saying that I have a paper. A paper has just been published. Now that you said that how to do legitimate participatory work, I don't know if I dare to talk about my paper, but I will anyway. What we did is, or what we were trying to do is to center the epistemic authority of data workers in the work of AI by creating a documentation. I mean, when we talk about data sets, again, through the frames of bias, through the framings of transparency, the first thing that people or researchers have done is, okay, let's document data sets. And that's great. But the question is, who's documenting whose work? And that's a question that we as a community had not asked ourselves. And what we did was to explore whether documentation is helpful for the data workers, whether that is a burden for them, and whether this could, again, recenter their knowledge in a way or help them recenter their knowledge. So we engaged, I engaged in a process of 3 years with 2 communities of workers, one in Syria, one in Argentina, and to try to develop a model that could help them. And we did to a certain extent. And the good thing is that for the workers, of course, the documentation was important, but not for transparency. It was a communication medium. Why? Because they are never heard. And they have no way of communicating with the requesters, so the people, the engineers doing the modeling. So they get an instruction, they get like a request to do labeling in a certain way, and that way is very narrow. But they don't have a way, like a recourse. They cannot ask questions. They cannot say, hey, these labels don't really fit. Like, we are the ones who are working with the data. We know, we have a better feel for the data, if you will. They don't have a way to influence that. They even have questions about ethics. They always want to know, what does this data do? Where does it come from? What's going to be done with this data? How does this data affect me as a worker or them as workers? Is this data going to be detrimental to their mental health? Many questions that they have, and they are not believed to have, because they are always thought of as hazards for the data, bias-carrying hazards for the data, and never thought of as people with agency who could actually help produce better data. So starting from that, we went into this participatory engagement with them, and it turned out to be a very, very rewarding experience. It's bad that I said it was for them, because I'm just reproducing the feedback that we got, but also for us. And mainly they thanked us many times, because they were like, it's the first time that I'm in a room where I'm heard. It's the first time that we also brought some of the requesters to some of the workshop sessions and some of the activities. And it was their first time that the workers had a space to ask questions to the requesters. That's something that never happens. They are the ones being asked the questions, but they never get to ask the questions. So yeah, I'm not saying that we are saving the world with that, or that we are making anything better, but it's a start, I feel.
I agree. I'll be very brief. There is no one true participation, of course. Like, participation can take so many different forms, and but I think a beneficial participation, beneficial to the people that's supposed to help within the space of AI, of course, has to be. It's not just inclusion. It's not just like, please label this data, that way you are participating. It has to be like it has to be participatory all the way through. It has to not just in data labeling, not just in like in the design process. It has to it has to begin from like conception, and it's the disability community, I think in the 1970s and the 1980s had this motto that nothing about us without us. So true participation is in a way like where there is no one central, control of power, but where, of course, these concepts are not very easy and straightforward. And when you delve into it, there are so many complications, but it has to, it has to allow people to say no, to including say no to participation, and it has to allow people to take actions and to take control and agency all the way in the AI pipeline, from data collection, data labeling, to the design, to the deployment. I just want to add that.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. And there are more than one people raising their hands. So,
or we can be very brief with the answers.
Yeah,
Have
let's do
everyone
that.
ask their questions.
So, sorry, if you'd like to go first, and then Pratham behind you. Great.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I work for one of those big tech companies that we're dismantling today, and I always feel like, first part is I feel that it's good that I'm there because I'm representing a voice that is not heard. But then I also feel like, is me being here continuing to play into the system and perpetuate the issues, Mm-hmm. So I want to know from like a practical standpoint, what do you think? And I work in the AI ML space as well in cloud computing. What do you think that someone in my position can do to push this forward without necessarily quitting my job or changing my entire life?
Do you want to say something?
So I, as someone fresh out of a PhD who has been broke for many years and now I want to make money, I can relate to that. On the one hand, I'm not driven by money. I don't want to be driven by money, but I want a comfortable life. And that kind of opportunity is afforded to me if I go join big tech. On the other hand, and that doesn't like joining, I was in a big tech before. I don't consider Mozilla a big tech. I don't know, maybe it is. And like when you are going in, maybe the place you are is different. I don't know. It's likely that you are going to be treated as a token and you won't have a full agency to advance the kind of research you want to do. At least that was the case for me. So it's like you have to, on the one hand, like as a Black woman who is maybe not financially privileged, you have to look after yourself. But on the other hand, you have to also, you want to also do the right thing. You want to be driven by your passion. You want to make some change, even if it's moving the needle a little bit. So before I would have said like, you have to be like ethical and don't go work in this or that, and but now like I realize it's much more complex, and maybe if you are financially privileged or otherwise privileged, maybe the decision is easy for you. But now I'm like, I don't judge people, so you are the right person to make the right choice for you in terms of balancing your own well-being and doing like what's advancing the value of your community and the value of your own values. So it's up to you.
Do you want to add anything to that, Mila?
No, I would just leave it at that. Was brilliant.
Great.
Just to say that choosing where to work is also a privilege that sometimes we don't have. And I mean, it's good that you're trying your best to do this from within, but also, everyone needs a job. Yeah.
And Pratham, do you want to pass the microphone?
I'm hoping you can talk me a little bit out of some pessimism that I carry.
No, not the right people.
Yeah.
Not the right
Okay,
panel.
this is on now. Because like the other way that I think of digital colonialism as like a parallel to actual colonialism is like the monopolization of resources, in particular compute. And like, I don't really know what the path forward is. And I'm hoping you have some path forward on how we like stop using all of the GPUs to get like 1% increases in accuracy and use them to audit data sets? Like, is there a vision that you have for what that looks like?
Please. No, please. I'm not the person to give hope.
At the end of a long day.
Oh, I'm trying to give hope.
It's hard.
We can just be honest.
I'm sorry. Like all the stuff that comes to my mind is like, my friend really put it this morning really beautifully, how, for example, like the undersea cables are owned by, is it 5 or 6 companies? 5 companies. And this gets even much more really troublesome when you go, to the African continent. So one of the person I'm mentoring is studying like the undersea cables and ownership in Southern Africa. And there are 3 cables owned by Facebook, Amazon, and Google. And I was thinking about digital colonialism when I found out that one of the cables that Google is laying across, Southern Africa to the US, called Olaudo Equiano. He was like in mid 18th centuries. He was the first person that was enslaved, that gained his freedom, that came out of slavery, that managed to write, that was the first proponent of abolishing slavery. He really is like a monumental figure for Africa. And he followed the same trail during the slave trade. And the cable also follows the same trade, the same line, and they named it like after his name. And I just like, I did not know where to begin. So I'm just like, and this is stuff that you don't know, you don't hear about. You don't know who is behind the ideas. You don't know the individual. You don't know the people like making these decisions. You don't know what's being decided. She has like, my mentee has to do so much detective work to pin these things down. So this is something that we should all be aware of, and we should all be outraged, and we don't even know about it. So I try to be hopeful, but when I see the reality, all I have is outrage. I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Same. Sorry.
I think that outrage definitely has a place, though. I mean, it's kind of what seems to be driving a lot of our work anyway. So maybe it's positive. And on that not so hopeful, but important note, thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. And thank you especially to Mila and Abeba for that fantastic discussion.